Hey guys, what's up? I recently started a new D&D campaign with a group of people who have never played before. And something that comes up a lot when we talk about wanting to like be a DM and get people into playing Dungeons and Dragons is that there's a lot of people that kind of know about role-playing games and D&D and all this kind of stuff, but it's not really an accessible thing to them, right? Like it seems very complicated, very intense. Like people, if they don't have like all of the country names of the Lord of the Rings series memorized, feel like, oh, maybe, well, I can't play, it's too much, it's too weird. Like there's this kind of a lot of people are playing it and they're having fun with it, and it's kind of entered this cultural moment where it's not super dorky anymore. It's like almost considered cool, but it's not really accessible for new players. And a lot of times people who are really into it, like me, like I want to get my friends into playing it, and sometimes it's a little tricky to start a new campaign with new players. And so I was just thinking, like, while I was going through some of the problems that I was facing and some of the little tricks and ideas I had for, getting new players quickly adapted to the game, I thought maybe I'd share them with you. And I'm going to do it while we are watching Brian Snowdy paint a warrior throwing a gnome grenade. We have videos of the gnome grenades. They're basically spell bombs that you can chuck, and this is a very, like, iconic, take on a very iconic World War II picture photograph of a German soldier throwing one of those World War II stick grenades, which is kind of how we envisioned the gnome grenades. You wind them up and then you chuck them, and then it's a mini fireball or some kind of, maybe some weird spells like a time slow spell or something. But you throw these, it's a fun thing. You can watch the video on it for more info on that. But we'll watch Brian paint that, and I'll talk a little bit about getting new people involved in the game. So, I play Pathfinder, which first edition Pathfinder, but this works for D&D, Shadowrun. It'll work for any kind of role-playing game that you want to play. There's just some real basic stuff, and the most important thing that I can tell you in terms of, like, if you're going to get 4 people together and you want to teach them how to play the game and they don't know anything about it, is to pre-generate their characters for them. I know that, like, this is not going to work for people who are really into the game and know all the rules and everything, and they want to do the homework and show up. This is for, like, people who are expecting basically a board game night plus, right? So, one of the big pitfalls of trying to get new players into D&D is that the entire first session is making characters, and you get these people in there who maybe aren't even sure if this is going to be for them in the first place. Like, I don't know, it's like elves and dwarves, I don't know if this is really my thing. And then you get them in there, and then you got to sit there for an hour and a half and be like, okay, well, dex is dexterity, that's your physical abilities, or that's how quickly you can move and your balance and your agility, and so, like, do you think that's more important? Trying to like explain the difference between intelligence and wisdom, and it's just like the person sitting there is just like, I don't care, right? I have no idea what you're talking about. None of this stuff matters to them. They are not gonna, like, well, it influences your fortitude saves, and they're like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what any of this is. So, I mean, if you just think about, like, somebody trying to explain the most basic card game to you, right? Like, if you tried to explain poker to a person who had never played poker before, you're going to be talking for an hour, and it's going to be the most confusing sounding thing in the whole world. And it's just like, all right, you just got to play it, and then once we get going, like, you'll see what I mean. It's not so bad. D&D and role-playing games, like pen and paper, board, like tabletop role-playing games, are this, like, plus. You could spend 2 hours explaining every little thing on the character sheet, but it's just they're not gonna appreciate it, even if, like, they have, like, a little bit of a background on video games and they've seen some of this stuff before. It's different in every system, and just don't even worry about it, right? My advice to you is to pre-make characters for the people who are going to play. And if you want to kind of ask them ahead of time, oh, do you want to be more of like a fighter guy? You want to be more of like a wizard guy? Or you want to be more of like a thief guy? They generally understand those basic archetypes. You can build somebody that's kind of similar to them. And my advice for this is to kind of, you want to build these characters second to third level, I think, is usually a pretty good starting place for new characters. Second or third level, like, you can take a couple hits before you die. You got a couple of cool little powers, but you don't have this crazy spell sheet. You don't have all of this, your character sheet is manageable. And then on top of that, I think you generally want to give new players more of a martial class, right? Basically, like, you got a weapon, you can fight, you can take some hits, you got a decent armor class. Just kind of make them these all around, like, they can fight martial, they got a couple of skills. Even if you want them to be like a spellcaster, just don't even be like, well, here's the spell list, so pick the 6 spells that you like. Be like, here are your 4 spells per day. Behind the curtain, like, these are the ones you have prepared for the day, right? And then that's it. We'll go forward after you kind of have the general idea of how this game works and decide that you like it and want to come back. We can get more in depth with this, but pre-make the guys so when they sit down to be like, okay, here we go, I don't know what I'm getting into, you hand them their sheet, you say, your guy's a paladin, he's like a crusader knight, he's good at fighting, he's good at intimidating people, he can tell when people are lying to him, and 3 times a day he can heal. Boom. That's the character sheet. Don't explain anything else. Don't get into like, well, petrified poison saves, or if somebody tries to like hit you with a rod of petrify, you're like, you're not going to run into that today. So like, don't worry about it. Just let it go. Hand them their sheet. Tell them like, here's the 3 skills you're good at. Here's like 1 to 2 magic powers that you have you can use per day. And like, you either are good at fighting or you're not good at fighting. They don't really need to know much more than that. You can get into it later. And like, I have found some success with just kind of like, fudging the classes a little bit. I know that like some of the more purist people won't appreciate this or agree with it or like it, but it's like, all right, well, I'm going to change. I don't want to get into the war priest using a fervor ability to do this. I'm just going to say that like 3 times a day you can do this. Just keep it simple. They have give them some equipment in their backpack and give them a couple like fun, weird things in their backpack, right? Your guy's carrying a week of food. He's got a canteen full of fine wine, and he's got a bear trap, a 10-foot chain, a bag of caltrops, and like a tanglefoot bag that you can throw it and it'll like hold people in place, like a bag of glue that you chuck at people. They will find ways to use these weird things, and they'll sit there thinking about it, and that's kind of what you want to get people into, right? Because the thing that separates tabletop role-playing games from pretty much anything else is that there is no like when people are like, how does this game work? It's like, well, this is a choose your own adventure game that we all make up as we go, right? We're all kind of writing a novel together as we go. And the big advantage that this game has over video games, anything else, is that players can drive this story and they can do whatever they want, right? And there's always a temptation as well, like, and this kind of gets me to another point, which is there's always kind of a temptation to have, not railroad the party, right? If you're playing with more experienced players, and we'll be like, oh, I feel like I'm being railroaded because I have to go into this thing and do this. With new players, like, you want to kind of start them at the beginning of a dungeon and say, like, okay, here's, you've been brought here by this guy and you're going to go do this thing, right? It's okay to railroad these people, because the crazy thing for them are going to be like, well, I have this bear trap. Can I try to throw the bear trap up and hit onto the ledge and then use that to crawl up with a rope? It's like, yeah, you can do that. You can try it. I mean, I don't know. You got to roll for it, but like, it's a good idea. You can give it a shot. That's going to be kind of the mind-blowing thing for them. So when you give them cool inventory items, they're going to come up with interesting ways to use them. And then with your adventure, you kind of want to go pretty straightforward, right? Like, couple little encounters, couple fights, couple little navigational hazards. You got to climb down a cliff, or they've got to like navigate some quicksand, or they've got to jump over whatever, a river or whatever, and then give them a cool piece of treasure, right? Some kind of fun magic item, something that like does something cool, right? Like it's a tomahawk and you throw it and it comes back to your hand, or it's a sword and it catches on fire when you say the command word. So, some of that stuff is a little bit overpowered for second level, but it kind of draws them in, like, oh, that's that magic sword I got. Oh, that's cool. And I do that video on the different magic weapons, and it's like, well, it's a +1 sword, but it's got all this writing on it, and it feels warm to the touch, and the blade is red, and they're like, oh, cool, like, that's awesome. So yeah, you want to kind of bring them into this, give them an adventure that is more or less accessible, so that when they start the story, don't just like, more experienced players, they want to be like, you're in a tavern in this town, and like, you can go find an adventure and go do something, or figure out what you want to do next, or here's like a bunch of, you have to stop this baron and like go figure out how to do that. New players, it's too much, it's overwhelming for them, right? You want to say, you've been given this quest, you've come to this location, here is where you are. Here's what you're trying to do. Here's what you want to accomplish. And you'll get treasure if you complete it, or you'll get money, or you'll get whatever. So you don't worry about railroading them, because it's already going to be kind of overwhelming to them that, like, oh, well, I can just do this. There's no like rules for how caltrops work. I can do creative stuff with this weird equipment that I have, or these weird powers I have. And it's like, yeah, that's the pull, right? That's the advantage. And then, so you kind of want to give them their pre-made characters, throw them into situations, and also when you're building this adventure, you want to throw them into situations where they'll get to use those powers, right? So if you've got a guy who's like immune to poison, then like, or can cure poison or whatever, throw something poisonous at them so that this person can use their powers and feel cool about it. Because that's like, you're really trying to sell, if you're trying to get new people into the game, your first session, you're selling something to them, right? You were pitching this game to them and trying to get them hooked on it and into it. So you want them, like, in one of the most rewarding things in D&D is when you have like the perfect item, or you've been saving this magic item for 6 adventures, and now, oh my god, this is the perfect spot to use it. Or like, oh, I took this spell and you weren't ready for it, and now I'm gonna like totally own this boss with this cool spell that I have. You kind of want them, like, those are very rewarding experiences as a player, and you want to give that experience to these people on their first try so that they're in and they're hooked, Another thing that is kind of overwhelming for people is all the dice. So my brother has an idea, like, I'm too type A to like to do this, but my brother's thing with the dice is to play with 5 new people. You can get like a 5-pack of dice off Wish, or if you have a bunch of dice or whatever, mix them all up so that they get a set, but every set's a different color. So that if they're like, well, I don't know if with the D8, D10, you can be like, oh, roll the red one. Then they don't have to like count the sides. D8 and 10 are kind of weird, and 4s like weird. When you ask somebody to roll a 4-sided dice, they're gonna look at you like you're crazy because they can't imagine what that would look like. Oh, it's the yellow triangle. So that he's had a lot of success with that. I'm too type A to like have different colored dice, so like I'm just weird like that. This is a personal hang up. I wouldn't worry about that too much. And then don't worry about experience points. Don't worry about any of that stuff. You're going to level these people up slowly. Just give them a couple sessions to kind of get into their characters. Another thing worth mentioning is, like, don't make them name their characters. This is kind of a weird thing, but like, don't make them name their characters or come up with a backstory or a homeland or any of that stuff. When you give them their pre-gen characters, just leave that stuff blank. And they can fill it in. They can tell you what they look like, or what their name is, or where they're from, or what their backstory is, any of that stuff. If you're starting with like your adventurers, you're at the entrance of this cave, you got to go in, you got to get this item out of it. They'll fill that stuff in, but like, it's a weirdly vulnerable thing for a person to be like, some people are going to gravitate towards it immediately, but it's a weirdly vulnerable thing to be like, yes, I am Eladin from the forests of Fenrir, and I am here to avenge my father, or whatever. Like, that's like the most out there that they're going to put themselves, and they're going to kind of have to get into that a little bit more slowly, right? It's a very, like, if you start at the beginning, like, what's your character's name? What do they look like? What's their homeland? Give me some, like, 1-paragraph backstory on them. You're going to scare some people away, because they're going to be like, I wasn't aware there was homework here, and I don't want to, like, kind of go out there and be all in on it. You kind of have to be the one that goes all in. You're the one that you have to do the voices if you're going to do the voices, or you have to like kind of explain, like, oh, the room is big and it's there high ceilings with stalactites and there's a dragon in the far. Like, you kind of have to get into it, and you can kind of coax them into it. Leave that stuff blank, let them fill it out, let them tell you about it later. But to start, you get everybody together, tell them 6:30 we get together, get them all together at 6:30. If you're over 21, have a drink ready for them so that they can kind of get loosened up a little bit. Hand them their character sheets. Everybody's going to have some joke or some little thing that they say about, oh, well, I don't know about this or whatever. It's fine. Your guy's a warrior. Your guy's a thief. Your guy's more of a spellcaster. Your guy's more of this. This is what your characters can do. You're at the entrance of this cave. You've been given this quest by a mysterious stranger. You have to find this staff. And, here we go. First thing you're looking at is a 20-foot drop down a cliff. How are you guys going to get down? And you're in, right? And then you're off and running. I feel like that's a lot more successful than some of those, especially when I was first starting to play and trying to get some of my friends into it, where you sit them down and you spend 20 minutes explaining to them the difference between knowledge arcana and spellcraft, and it's just like, none of this is going to matter, right? Nobody cares about any of this stuff. So yeah, like, I just think the better you can kind of start, like, railroad your party at the beginning, railroad them into their characters, and then kind of get them into it, and then once they get into it, you can kind of broaden it and introduce things slowly, like, okay, what you got to do now is you got to roll a saving throw. What that is, you see the thing reflex on you, and you roll that, and that is your ability to dodge out of the way of this thing, and then that way you're not bombing them with everything and overwhelming them with information, and then at the end, you're giving it to them piece by piece, and be like, oh, that's that thing that I rolled when I got shot by a lightning bolt or whatever. Okay. Anyway, this has been successful for me. I've had a lot of good experiences trying to get new people in with this. Hopefully it'll work for you, and yeah, we will see you on the next one. Thanks so much, guys.